Find within our hearts. Oops, wrong class. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places, filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse our stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen. Yeah, we're not in Bible study. We don't need shine within our hearts, although we always do. But all right, so we had two chapters to go through, and normally I would just have us go backwards a little bit and answer any questions, and for sure we can, because obviously last class was wonderful in the sense that we were kind of ping-ponging all over the place with questions, comments, and um, perspectives. But because we've got to get through two chapters, and both of them are very, very strong, let's go ahead and do particulars on providence, and then we'll do generalities on the upbringing of children. So why don't we go ahead and go around the room, and so that all of you are wondering, like, where's Nick? Nick's in the office physically this evening, so.
Father needed company tonight. So
I did. I was lonely.
You can't get rid of me, he said. It's like a bad penny.
So does anyone have a particular part of Providence that they want to focus on?
Well, Father, I understand why the Presbyterians believe in predestination. This is a very hard thing to understand for me, in that I know that God does not have free will. Yet he knows what we're going to do.
Correct. The difference between foreknowledge and predestination.
I know we are not predestined, and let me, I don't, is it now time to say something I didn't understand?
Yeah, please.
Okay. And I understand we have free will in what we do, and we need to pray to God for, guidance and so forth. But my feeling is like, well, if he already knows what we're going to do, we're supposed to pray, but how does that change? Does anything change? I mean, he already knows what's going to happen, yet we're supposed to pray for, guidance or this or for our children or that, and he'll hopefully answer our prayers, but yet he already knows everything. So do we have an effect on that then by saying we should pray?
There is an effect, and this is one of the things that is very, very interesting, and why sometimes I say you don't even need to say specificity in your prayers to the Lord of what you need and what you want. Your prayers should just be a simple prayer, in as much as God already knows what you need. He knew before you asked, and he was there providing you the avenues to get to where you needed to go. And oftentimes in hindsight, when you look at events that have transpired, you recognize the will of God and how this tapestry works. You've probably heard the example where life is like a beautiful tapestry, where on the one side it's a beautiful, beautiful pattern. You turn it around and it looks like chaos. It looks absolutely nuts with all these strings here, strings there, with this connecting here, this connecting here. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever until you turn it around, and then you go, oh, it makes sense. Now, to the point of your question, what's the point of praying if God knows what you're going to do? Is that just because God knows what you're going to do does not take away your agency. You are still the one that is free. You are still the one that can change. You are the one that changes. And so God knows what you're going to do. He knows how you are going to behave. And yet, what's interesting about that, and we see this within the context of the history of mankind, is despite the fact that God knows what is going to happen. So, for example, we go to Genesis, and we see the story of Adam and Eve, and we see when God basically outlines what is going to be necessary to save mankind, when he talks about the child of Eve versus the child of the serpent, basically stating our salvation will come through the child of Eve. So Christ was foretold even then in Genesis. And yet, despite that, God kept giving us opportunities through Moses, through the Ten Commandments, through the judges, through the kings of Israel, through the Babylonian captivity, through after the Babylonian captivity. God kept giving us chance after chance after chance after chance, even though he knew ultimately what was going to be necessary to save us? His own son. And so it is our free will that is maintained. That is the love of God. So, yes, there is a difference between predestination versus pre-knowledge. He's out of time, so he sees the whole picture. He is not limited to sequential order like we are. We can't see the future or the past. Well, Porphyrios can, but
Yes.
but we can't. But God can, because God is outside of time. So that is why he has the omniscience, is all-knowing, sees the beginning, the end, all of it. And yet, in his mercy, he allows us to participate. He allows us to have the ability to change our fates, because we are the ones enacting it. So he knows what we're going to do, but he constantly gives us opportunities to right ourselves, to change ourselves. So there is a point.
In the example that's used time and again here, he knows that somebody is going to murder somebody else.
Yes.
Is it the will of that person to not murder that person?
So you're saying the person that was going to murder, you're saying, did he have the ability to not murder?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. It was his decision to murder. God did not make him murder.
He could also then not murder him.
Yeah, exactly. He could have not murdered, but he decided to murder. It was his decision, his agency.
But if he decides, if God knows he's going to murder somebody,
Yes.
and he doesn't murder that person, then God didn't know, or God knows that he's going to murder them.
God just knows. I mean, for God, it's a fact. It's one of those things. It's like it's like reading the news. You know what it is. It's not a matter of, oh, well, maybe it won't, maybe it won't. God knows what is going to happen. And this is why sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes God intervenes and changes certain things that we think would have been one way but end up being another way. And some of it, too, is just people not listening to God. So case in point, I had a relative who was with her daughter. And they were in a parking garage. And suddenly the daughter was getting kind of the heebie-jeebies, like something was not right. And something was telling her, be careful, look around. And suddenly she looked around and saw that there was a guy following her. And so she and her mother, they got into the stairwell of the parking garage and went up a floor. And then, lo and behold, the guy was going up a floor. So the person, like a tiger, was stalking them. And so the daughter basically, something told her, use your phone, call the police. So she got on her phone and called the authorities basically to say, this is what's happening. The authorities basically said, stay on the phone and, try to go up a couple of floors to try to lose this guy. Well, eventually did lose the guy. Then they saw on the news a day or two later, they saw the individual was under arrest for rape and assault and had been basically stalking young women in Chicago. Now, the question was, why did they get saved and other people aren't? What happened to the other? Why were the other victims of this person not saved by God? And so my answer was, I don't know, truthfully. But a theory is you were listening. God spoke and you were listening. So the guardian angel basically was warning you, you need to move, you need to move. But so many times with sin and our own delusions, we're not listening or watching anything. And so there may have been opportunities for other people to be saved too. But because we didn't listen, we followed ourselves into these paths. And therefore, we're not saved when we, in theory, could have been.
In theory, Father, you're saying, though, that God already knew this person is going to listen or will listen. And that person, maybe is not in tune, with their holy...
Correct, but this is where I think we look at the divine providence of God and his divine love, is because God knows whether you're going to listen or not, and yet he still attempts. It's not like he's saying, oh, well, they'll listen to me, so I'll talk to them, but I'm not going to talk to them because they're not going to listen to me. God is still trying with everybody.
But Father, can we change? In other words, can we change the outcome? I mean, in other words, God already knows the outcome, but can we change the outcome in any way?
Here's the thing. You all keep talking about changing the outcome as if somehow you also are on the outside looking in, able to see the foregone conclusions. You are able to change things because you exist in time and you have agency. You are not fighting against fate. You have the ability to do what you're going to do, to make the choices you are going to make. So the reality is there is no fate for you. There is no set path for you that you're just trying to follow along. You are trying to strive for God, and He is laying out the markers for you. He knows where you're going to go. He knows what you're going to do because He knows everything. This is where it's kind of the paradox of this statement comes in, because He knows everything. That's what makes Him God, omniscience. So He knows the beginning, He knows the end, He knows everything because He exists outside of time. You don't. You exist in time. So for you, this isn't a matter of predestination, it's just your life. Does that make sense?
This is going to seem a little bit out there, but to me, I think we have a quantum God, and what I mean by that is, anything about quantum, like the uncertainty principle, you're trying to examine the movement of an electron or some other subatomic particle. You can know one of two things. You know where it is or how fast it is, but you can't know both. And that's what this is, to me, is knowing. It's there, but it's not there. It's the murder is going to be committed, but it might not be committed because the person has free will.
Correct. So as far as we are concerned, we're looking at infinite possibilities, infinite abilities, things that could happen. So the idea of 1,000 different timelines of things that could happen. You go this way, he goes this way. All these different possibilities, and they exist because there's the possibility that you could make that choice. And when we multiply that by the trillions and billions of things, the variables that are in the universe, it seems beyond scope. The reality is God sees all of them, and He knows which way you're going to take. He knows which one you're going to do. And very rarely does He interfere with it. He does on occasion. We are not deists. Does everyone know what deists are?
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad Pat knows.
Is it like a deist as a deity?
No, a deist is from the French philosophie, which basically is the ideology that God is a watchmaker. And so the concept is God wound up the watch and walked away. God created the world. It's almost an agnostic, borderline atheist theology, which basically says that there is a God. He created the world and He's gone. He does not interfere. He just watches. He's a watchmaker. And that's what the deists believe. So the French philosophers came up with this idea in post-Enlightenment France.
Okay, all right.
So we do not believe that God is apart. In fact, within Orthodoxy, that's why we have the dome above us as opposed to the steeples, because the idea is that God, while being infinite and everywhere, is also immanent and present. That He is actually with you. He is not apart from you. And that's where this divine providence comes in, is that, yeah, He knows what you're going to do. And He could step back and go, okay, whatever, you're going to do what you're going to do. And yet He's with you, interacting with you, participating with you, trying to help you make the right decisions, even when He knows you are going to reject Him, possibly. That's love. I kind of realized as I was reading this chapter, it's like, this is another one where we thought we were going to just jump over it to get to the next chapter. And it ends up being like an extremely important topic that just, when we really teased it, I was like, okay, this is actually a critical concept of God's knowledge versus our knowledge. And when you look at individuals like St. Porfirio, St. Paisios, that have this, that they're able to tap into that it's actually could make you go insane. Because that means that you're able to see all of these spider webs, these almost like shattered glass, broken tendrils going everywhere, the possibilities, and to see what is going to happen. Incidentally, just so we're aware, psychics that predict the future, because we've heard of those things, what they are essentially demons that are able to go a short distance down those threads and predict what is going to happen. They don't know the far future, but they can guess based on trajectories and what people do and their habits to say, okay, these things are going to collide. So when you hear like a psychic say, oh, she predicted the car accident, like, okay, yeah, because the demons knew that every day at this time you take your trip, and every day at this time you take your trip. And they know you're going to get a coffee, and they know that because of the atmosphere that there's going to be ice on the road in this day. And so therefore this person is going to possibly look down and not realize there's black ice, and they're going to careen. Well, that's not predicting the future. That's making an educated guess with all the variables present. And so that's what the demons are able to do with psychics that are able to, quote unquote, see the future.
Father, is that the same thing when, because I've seen that on television where the psychic supposedly knows things about someone who has passed, and supposedly they're talking and they know things about that person that no one would know except you.
I've run into that too on TV too. I watch Blue Bloods, and they have a psychic on. She has a piece of fabric of some murdered person's clothing, and
yeah,
feels,
she's able to do telemetry
and feels what happened here, and you wonder how does it all tie into this.
So psychometry and all that stuff. I mean, basically what is happening again is that, so I can't remember which Desert Father did this, where he approached a psychic and said, I'm going to ask you a question. And he already knew what the answer was because he talked to his friend that's basically in Hong Kong. Like, okay, like I'm looking at my Thea Harriet right now, and she's wearing, horn-rimmed glasses that are brown. And so the father said, okay, I'm going to test the psychic. What color are the glasses of my friend in Hong Kong? And so the psychic went go, her glasses are horn rimmed, they're brown, and the everyone was like, oh my gosh, and they looked at the monk and said, is that true? And he says, yeah, that is absolutely correct. Now let me ask you this, for all of you looking, if this person could see the future and know certain things, why did it take 15 seconds for the psychic to say that? I will tell you why, because I can see it. Because it took the demon that long to travel from the psychic to my friend and back. So what they're able to do is they're able to basically gather things like a detective and find details. So ultimately it's not the loved one that is communicating these things through this medium, because what basically the devil likes to deal with is half-truths. Because case in point, look at us how deeply ingrained we are into the idea of fate. Oh my gosh, can I change my fate? And so we look to psychics. Why do people go to psychics? Because they want to change their fate. Because they think, oh my goodness, my fate is written and I've got to figure out a way to change it. And the way this is dangerous is because they deal with half-truths. And so with a half-truth, you're going to believe part of it. And if you're going to basically put your trust in that, where are you not going to put your trust?
God.
You're not going to trust in God. You're not going to hope in God. Not when that means that I might be afraid. Not when that means that there might be fear and uncertainty. When the reality is that, yes, you'll get a temporary fix with a half-truth. That's basically a drug hooking you in. But that's not reality. And they're not able to predict the distant future because they can't see the future. They are not omniscient. The devil is not omniscient like God. God is omniscient. God can see everything. He exists outside of time. The devil does not. The devil is a creature. The devil exists in time. He is not equal with God. He does not have the same powers, ability, or scope as God. He is not omnipotent, omnipresent, or omniscient. Only God is. And sometimes we conflate the two and we think that the devil has these things when he doesn't. Does anybody have? Yep.
The story of Oedipus shows how dangerous it is to try to change your Here he received the prophecy that he would kill his father, marry his mother, so he says, that's not going to happen. I'm going to do this, this, and this to avoid it. And what he did to avoid it is what made it happen.
Correct. And this is what happens when we basically try to put all of our focus, all of our energy on earthen things. Where instead of looking to the idea of the eternal, instead of looking to our relationship with God, we're trying to make our physical life eternal and find comfort forever in this physical life, when the reality is we have basically robbing ourselves of the potential of everlasting riches and a relationship with God. And so when we try to change our fate, we're looking at fate from our humanistic and fleshy prerogatives, if that makes sense. All right. We've talked about the generalities of this, or is there anything specifically that St. Porphyrio said that you want to kind of touch on for these two sections? Incidentally, while you're looking that up, I find it funny that that story of the monk who was saved by his spiritual father is very similar to those two women that were saved from that potential rapist. The idea that because spiritually we're listening, we were able to get the warning and move.
But again, Father, God knew that they would listen.
That's inconsequential. Yes, God knew that they would listen, but the fact is that God reached out. That God does not just leave you to your own device and go, okay, fine, fine. He keeps trying no matter what. And you have the ability to change. You have the ability to get back up. It is never too late.
I think this on page 193 in the middle. I mean, I've heard this before, of course. Cannot discover the thoughts of God. But people are always attributing such and such happening in the world as this is God's way of punishing us, or this is God's way of rewarding us. And that's assuming that you know the thought of God.
Correct. I mean, this reminds me of, was it a decade ago almost, that those tsunamis hit those power plants in Japan. And there were all these people saying, oh, this is a result of the sinfulness of the people of Japan. This is because of their sinfulness that they are suffering now. And all those people died and all they're without power. And Metropolitan Yaakov was a blessed memory. He said, no, this is foolishness. It is not because of the sinfulness of the people of Japan. It is because of the sinfulness of all mankind that these things happen and that the world aches and groans. So to try to put the will of God and try to like pronounce it like that is scary. This is one of the things that I saw somebody joke once with saying that there are some televangelists that say, I know God better than I know myself. As if trying to put God as like an equation that they can put in their back pocket. When the reality is, no, we don't know the will of God. And we really have to hearken back. And this is hard, but we have to look to the redemption of St. Peter. Do you all know what I'm talking about? So when Peter was redeemed after he had denied Christ, Jesus brought him back with three asking Peter, do you love me? And then he told Peter after the final, do you love me? He said, when you're older, you're going to get carried where you don't want to go. Basically telling Peter, this is how you're going to die. So he basically told Peter, you're going to get crucified. Straight up. Now, Peter was told how he's going to die, how he's going to glorify God. And what did Peter do? He turned around and saw John, the beloved disciple, following them from a distance and asked, what about him? And God's answer is an answer that we really need to all take to heart. If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. Now, what that means is that God's going to do what God's going to do. I can't predict where he's going to be, what he's going to do, especially as a priest when I'm going to the hospital. I've seen some miraculous things. I've seen things happen that should not have happened. People surviving things that they should not have survived. People coming back from things that they should not have come back from. Conversely, I've also seen a lot of death. I've seen a lot of people die in the ways that you expect them to die. I've seen a lot of people die in ways that you wouldn't expect them to die. I've seen people die when they thought that they had hope and that things were turning around, and then it didn't. I've seen it all, as far as that's concerned. But God is still great. It doesn't matter about this person or that person. What is that to you? Follow me. And so there is no way for me to know the will of God to say that, well, God is going to save this person, but not this person. God is going to intervene here, but not here. You know, when you look at the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of children that die of starvation every single day, you know, this is one of the big arguments that atheists have. Where's God? How could there be a loving God if he's letting those children suffer? And more than just starve. You know,
We should ask, why are we letting them suffer?
correct. And that's the problem, is that we don't look to our free will or the fact that those people that are making those children suffer, they have agency. And they're going to suffer for it. But that is not necessarily God's will. God is not willing for those children to die. So it's very, very difficult. So this is a it's a toughie. Because, and Jesus Christ too, he had to deal with it himself. Because when Jesus Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane, what did he say before his crucifixion? He said, if it's possible, take this cup from me. So Jesus Christ showed us his own humanity and showed that, yeah, it's tough. I get it. I understand. Because what was Jesus Christ basically agreeing to? It wasn't just agreeing to die. It's not like being shot in the head where, you know, it's like 2 seconds of pain and then you're gone. He was agreeing to torture, humiliation, and finally being hung up and crucified in the most barbaric, torturous way possible. That's rough. So yeah, our God knows what it is and how difficult it is to follow the will and to say, okay.
Never mind. That's what he found what he was looking for.
Oh my goodness! So we've spent over half the class on the the first one, which I thought was going to take 10 minutes, and then we would go into the children. So my question to you is: do we want to continue down this chapter and tease it out a little bit more for the full class, or do we want to get to the children, even though we'll only have a half hour on that?
You could go an hour and a half on the upbringing of children. I mean, this is just so deep. I mean, that discussion could go on forever.
All right. Well, if you want, we can do is, and that's if the class wants to, is we can start the discussion of children and then continue it as a two-parter for the next class as well.
Yeah, because a lot in there to talk about this, about the children.
Yeah.
So it's a big chapter, right? So it's a lot of points in there.
Yeah, and all this from a man who had no kids. Well, physical kids. He had spiritual children, but even from his very first pericope, where he's talking about the relationship of the children inside the womb, we see a deep understanding of the spirituality of parenthood.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start with some overarching themes, and then we will get into some of the particulars. So, Thea Harriet, while we've got you on the screen, why don't you go ahead and give us some of your overarching feelings on this chapter, and then we'll move on to the next people, and then we'll go a little deeper into the particulars.
Oh my God, it's so much. I don't even know where to start. Now, of course, reading this today, because my time is limited, reading this and I go, oh my God, I felt so hard raising up my children. I did so many mistakes.
So let me ask you
without
something.
even knowing, of course, all these things, And the first chapter, like let's take it from the beginning, where it says like that the upbringing
a bad mood. It feels like if she's angry. It feels everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if mind is not developed yet, if the mother's face is darkness, it's darkness for the baby too. How sad that is, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Like the old days, I remember, I know the older people back in the days, I was young when I heard all these stories, they said, when a pregnant woman, be careful, don't make her upset, don't do this, don't do that. And it didn't click on me, I was just a young, you know, child. But now that I see all this, um, it's how important it is when a mother, you know, when the baby, that's why they say at least the first 3 months is so, you know,
Absolutely.
dangerous, right? And whatever the mother has, a sorrow, a fear, anxiety, all this will affect the baby later on, even when it's born. So, really, you know, it's very important in these chapters.
This is one of the
There's
reasons
a
why.
lot of stuff in this book today.
Yes. This is one of the reasons why I get upset when people denigrate motherhood as, some sort of second class thing. When the reality is motherhood, there's a reason why the church uplifts mothers above every station and calls motherhood the most divine responsibility. So you're absolutely correct. Just as a side note, before we move on to another person's oversight, I actually managed to find the readings in Greek. I don't know if Georgia shared them with you. I sent them to her, so I don't know if that
Oh,
made it a
did
little.
you?
Yeah, so I don't know if that made it a little easier because I know that obviously it's probably going to be richer to read it in the original Greek than the translation that we're reading right now.
Yeah, for me, I have the book in English anyhow. So Georgia, I mean, it's easier for her, you know. So yeah. So did you tell her which book to get,
I
or
sent it to her. Yes.
oh, you sent it to her? Okay. Now I want to point something on this too before I get to somebody else. I can't even imagine with just reading the first couple chapters in here in the beginning that when the baby is born and we see all these, you know, side effects that there on the children,
Mm-hmm.
how much they get affected, from a mother's womb, how the mother feels.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we see a lot of the stuff when the kids they grow up and they get themselves in trouble and all that. It's like everything starts from the womb of the
Right.
mother.
All
How
that
they're
trauma
going,
and everything starts
the
there.
trauma and everything else. Yeah. Go ahead.
No
Somebody
pressure,
else.
moms.
No pressure, but yeah, okay.
All right, so
It's
let's go
easy
to
for
another
you to
mom.
say.
Pat?
It's easy for you to say that.
Yeah, well, following up on what Harriet was saying, I think that the modern moms have kind of a distorted understanding of this. Like, they know, like you see modern mothers, they want to expose the child in utero to classical music and they, stimuli, um, as if they could directly get that into the baby. They do recognize that the baby can be influenced while
Mm-hmm.
it's still in the womb, but they're not recognizing their spiritual life also affects the baby.
Yep, exactly right. Steve?
Uh, well, I think I was, um, I don't have the experience of having a child in a womb. I guess I'll about things later on in life. And, there's that, he goes back and forth between talking about how if you force things on your child,
Mm-hmm.
how if you show scorn to the child, all these things are affecting the child, you know, later in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much better that rather than giving lecture after lecture, and I think of lectures that I've given, uh, to children, you need to pray and to God, and both for yourself and for the child. Because the better that you are, I mean, I mean, if you're not well, the child's not going to be well. So it's for really for both of you, and that's going to reach into the child's heart more than any words that we're gonna tell them.
That words reach the ears, the prayers reach the heart.
Correct.
So then there's the opposite, of course. You know, is so on the one hand you don't want to, be scornful and force things. On the other hand, you don't want to praise. Uh, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, and what's really interesting is that a lot of what St. Porphyrius is talking about is really kind of ratified within child psychology today, and how they view, and granted, I think sometimes we go too much with the ideas like it's your parents' fault, it's your parents' fault. It's like, well, yes, but not for the things that you're talking about.
But I remember hearing, to your point, on public radio some time ago, where they talked about the behaviors that the kids learn could change the cellular structure of the brain, because of that impact of the things that are done either in the surroundings and the parents or otherwise. So it kind of all ties into this whole thought process that the elder, like you said, he had no kids, but he knew. I mean, he's giving advice, and it's very logical when you hear it. I mean, when we've all been in the mode, you're ready to knock your kid over for doing some knucklehead thing, and now you're thinking, okay, well, wait a minute, how could we handle this differently?
So they talk about this like a lot of modern self-help books where they're talking about almost like trying to acquire the good. And they've cited a couple of studies in which people will send good energy, good thoughts towards water, and then they freeze the water, and they see the crystalline that is in the water are these perfect, beautiful shapes. But when you send negative energy, harmful energy, hateful thoughts towards the water, the water's crystals become chaotic, sharp-edged, crazy looking. And so the idea is that what we're actually seeing in real time within nature is the effects that we're talking about here. What St. Porphyrius is talking about, the effects that it's happening. If that's happening to water, imagining what's happening to other people. Dr. Tobias?
Well, it's kind of hard to express this huge overall view that we have been reading and studying in this book and in the 30 steps, that humility is the basis of everything.
Mm-hmm.
That if you don't have humility, you'll never find God, you'll never, uh, and that goes with the prayer and everything about your children, for your children. Uh, but the opposite of that is praising your child so much and giving them nothing but praise, and they think that they're so great, and they become so egotistical, uh, and that all of the problems of society right now are all because of egotism. And the last three chapters, or last three paragraphs of this whole chapter, uh, really, really, really put it into perspective. Uh, can I read the whole
Yeah,
thing?
go right ahead.
Um, the conclusion is that we need to teach our children to live humbly and simply, and not continually to seek praise and applause. We need to teach them that there is humility, and that is the healthy state of life. The mindset of our contemporary society does harm to children. It is based on another psychology and another theory of education that is addressed to the children consequences of one's actions. And you see the results in our children and young people. Young people nowadays say, you need to understand us, but we mustn't go to them. On the contrary, we need to pray for them, to say what is right, to live by what is right, and proclaim what is right, and not conform ourselves to their way of thinking. We mustn't compromise the magnificence of our faith. We cannot, in order to help them adapt their own frame of mind, remain the people that we are and proclaim the truth and the light. Children will learn from the Holy Fathers. Teaching of the Fathers will instruct our children about confession, about passions and evils, about how the saints conquered their evil selves. We pray that God will enter into them.
Now, did you notice something very powerful there? When he was talking about how to deal with the children that become egotistical, and let's face it, with a society today that puts more praise in selfies, that kind of tells you all you need to know, is that we are in that egotistical frame of mind, and these are the philosophical teachings of atheism. That is basically how we raise children and how we do things. And this was, 50 years ago that Providence wrote this. So it's amazing that that what was written 50 years ago is like extremely apropos today. But notice that he did not use any language of negativity in anything that he was speaking about on how to address them. He was saying, proclaim what is true. He's saying, don't engage. Now, that seems counterproductive, right? It seems like, oh, well, we should engage them. We should tell them they're wrong. No, don't engage them. Don't throw fuel on the fire. Show what is right. Stand up for what is right. Give them the examples that they need to follow. Don't compromise on the magnificence of the faith. That does not mean to basically try to use egotism or elitism with orthodoxy to say, oh, well, we're right, you're wrong, and you're so arrogant. No. You're not going to win somebody over by telling them they're arrogant. Exactly. Game over before you start. So what do? You live the humble life. You proclaim truth. For example, people look to the Orthodox Church and they say, oh, you're anti this, you're anti this. Like, no, we're pro what we are. I don't need to condemn you. I proclaim the truth. I proclaim what the church believes. That doesn't mean I condemn you. That doesn't mean that I hate you. The church exists and exudes truth. God reveals the negative in the heart. God reveals what is wrong and lacking. Mrs. Tobias?
It's too late now, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't think you cannot. I mean, I think it would be personally wrong not to praise your children, to give them encouragement. I mean, is he saying you shouldn't give this, positive feedback or truthful feedback?
Well, we have to understand where he's talking about positive and how he was talking. He didn't say don't praise actions. He didn't say I like how you're writing in cursive. I like how you're doing this. Okay. What he was talking about was the language of you're the best little boy, you're the smartest little boy, no one is as good as you, oh my goodness, they broke the mold with you, no one was ever going to be made that's like you, oh my goodness, you're the best of the best of the best. And that language, that's the praise he's talking about. That's what we've seen being given to children. And what he's talking about is not just the idea that it creates egotists, but the idea being is that eventually people hit walls. And if you've been told again and again how wonderful you are, how wonderful you are, how wonderful, you think, I can conquer anything. The wall should just fall down before me. That there should be no problem, things should just fall down. Because I'm the best. My parents told me. I've been raised to think I am the very, very best. But the world doesn't work that way. And eventually you hit a wall. Eventually you encounter something that you are not able to just breeze past. And because you have never been taught how to acquire skills to climb the wall or to circumnavigate the wall, you fall down. And this is why he uses that image that they fall down almost like a baby and they're unable to move like a toddler. And they cry because there's nothing they can do. They don't know what to do. So when we talk about praising the child, we're not talking about never give praise. We're saying the way you give praise is important. The language that you use and the demeanor that you use and what you're communicating to the child.
Like certain parents, like their child could do no wrong regardless, whatever it is, it wasn't your fault.
Right. Well, like, for example, like, let's say that a child, I mean, it's a silly example. I think he used this, where it's like a child makes a drawing of something, and you say, this is Rembrandt, this should be hung in a museum. Well, yeah, that's nice to say, but that child doesn't understand you're not being serious. The child is internalizing, I'm the best. I'm a great artist. Whereas you could say, I love how you're trying so hard. I love that you're trying to make this look like a person. Encouraging doesn't mean excessive praise.
And yet, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the other thing I read through that is that I always thought, like, and he made me think a little bit differently, because you see people that go to church all the time, all this or that, or they're doing everything right thing, and then maybe their child doesn't turn out right, or they get influenced by other kids or something. But according to him, it still falls back on the parent. So I never thought of that. I mean, I just thought, well, you do everything right, and you hope the kids turn out good. But sometimes parents do everything right, and their kids don't. But what he's saying, it's still the parent.
Well, keep in mind, obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but by and large, just because you're going to church and just because you are giving the visual cues of orthodoxy does not mean that you are internalizing orthodoxy. Case in point, like when St. John Chrysostom talks about fasting, we mentioned this last week, that you can eat just bread and water, but it doesn't do your soul any good if in turn you're consuming your brother and sister. In other words, I can give off the pietistic vestiges of orthodoxy, but if I'm not living it in my heart, then that's a problem. Some people wonder, like, well, how can these people, well, speaking of other parishes I've seen, how can these people be so involved in church, but their children, who are now adults, don't go to church? You would think that because the parents were so religious, in theory, that their children should also be religious. But their children aren't. You know why? What were they talking about when they came home? How bad the priest is, how bad this person is, how bad this person is, how bad this person is. And so what the people are experiencing as they grow up is, okay, church is just another place for people to gossip and judge each other. And they tear down their priest. And so we see this, that there is no respect. So that Sebasmo that was there a generation ago, it's not there now because children weren't there. I remember a priest telling me once that he would see his parents, whenever they would start talking badly about the priest, they would always shoo the kids out of the room because they were like, they didn't want the kids to see them bad-mouthing the priest. But of course, what St. Peter is showing us is that it doesn't matter whether your kids are in the other room or not. When we're bashing somebody, whoever it is, spiritually, psychically, they're getting it. And we're causing trauma that way. And so it's very, very important for us to recognize that and say, okay, well, what can we do now? And I've heard this from a couple of people now jokingly saying, oh, it's too late for us. Not too late for anybody. But we live by good example. We pray for our children. Georgia? She might not hear me.
I don't know if she can hear you.
On mute.
Oh, there she goes.
Ella, yes.
So what are your overarching thoughts?
Dimitri Sejas, I don't know what you said. I'm sorry. I just reading something here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Didn't
What
follow.
what were τι σκέφτεσαι για αυτό chapter?
I don't have the book, so I don't know, guys. I cannot follow you because I don't have the book and I cannot study, you know.
Okay, okay. Well, just for the
You have the Iris Profilius, all right?
yeah.
Are you talking about the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the book, so I never have the chance to study before.
Oh, Sekoda Sim, I thought
then
Sekoda Sim, I thought I sent it to you. No worries, I'll send it to you next time.
No, you know what a book I have? I have a Iris Profilius Bios.
That's the same one. That's it.
No, it's not.
Yeah, the if you look at the titles.
I just said to Harula, it's Bios και λόγοι. That's what I
Yeah,
have.
that's in Greek. That's the name of this book.
But when I open, when I read, I see only talking about Iris Profilius' life, you know.
Yeah, the
Bios.
first half of this book, that was what that was. The first half of this book was his life.
I'm not there. I guess I'm not there yet.
That's okay. I'll show you when I'll show you later.
You guys, I listen to you. Don't worry. Okay.
No worries whatsoever. Vasiliki?
Okay.
I fell down my steps. I haven't been able to read because I'm in a lot of pain right now.
Oh, Vasiliki, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Therapy until December 1st.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
But I'm sure you have some insights to the idea of parenting.
But I never had any children. I helped raise my two nephews when my brother passed away. But
Does that not tell that's parenting?
well,
You know.
well, they're good boys now, and we just gave them love. And we might have overdone it with the youngest one because he was 2.5. And I think we kind of spoiled him, but he's married and has a good job, and the other one's married, has a good job, and they're doing great. So I guess we didn't mess up too much.
That's wonderful. So I'm going to close with, I know I'm going to go a little overtime, but I just want us to kind of sync on this for the idea of parenthood perspective. Because oftentimes we look at our job as parents is to make sure that our children get a good education, make sure that they marry someone that's good, make sure that they have children, and make sure that they're financially well off and that their future is secured. And we think that that's our goal as parents. When the reality is what St. Porphyrius is trying to teach us and what we as Orthodox parents need to really understand is that our job as parents, the primary concern is to prepare our children for the kingdom. And what that really means is to understand that there is not the guarantee that our children will outlive us. And I know that that's a horrible, terrible thing to say and to think about, but it is a reality. And what I want us to think about is the model of what I call the perfect mom. And the perfect mom is Saint Sophia. And we have to look at her because in the life of Saint Sophia, we don't see anything about a husband. For all intents and purposes, she's a single mom raising 3 daughters, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. Faith, hope, and love. And she's doing it all on her own. And we know the story that they were betrayed to the local government. They tried to get them all to renounce Christianity. When they realized that the little girls were not going to renounce their faith, they eventually separated them, thinking that if I separate them, they'll eventually give in to people being mean to them. They didn't. Then they started torturing the little girls. They still didn't give in. They killed each of them brutally in different horrible ways, finally ending with the youngest, Love, boiling her in a cauldron. Just absolutely horrible ways. And then when they came to St. Sophia, they said, should we kill her? And they said, nah, why bother? She just watched her daughters get ripped limb from limb. Leave her alive. That'll be more painful. And so then she takes the broken pieces of her daughters, buries them, prays over a hill for 3 days sobbing, and then she collapses on top of their grave and gives up her spirit. Now, for years, I thought that St. Sophia died of grief, that she was just so heartbroken about what happened to her little girls that she was just inconsolable, because after all, they were never going to grow up. They were never going to get married. They were never going to have children of their own. And then a friend of mine, Father Dimitri, kind of bopped me upside the head and said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "She wasn't crying tears of sadness. She was crying tears of pride. Because what did she name her daughters? Faith, hope, and love. The greatest virtues and qualities of the Holy Spirit. And so she, as a righteous mother, whose name itself means wisdom, taught her daughters to emulate, to be representative of each of those cardinal virtues. That was their goal. Love was her whole life, was basically to be agape in every sense of the word. Pisti, faith, was to be every sense of the word faith. Elpida, to be hope, in every sense of the word hope. Which means that when those girls died, they died perfected in their namesake's virtue. Meaning that those little girls, an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, have achieved a level of deification that many 90-year-olds who have lived their whole life in spirituality have not even begun to touch. So St. Sophia, even though her daughters died before her, even though they did not get to, quote unquote, get the life that we would have wanted for them, they were perfected, meaning that St. Sophia succeeded as a parent. Her primary goal as a mom was realized. And so she cried in joy for her daughters, and out of mercy and love, God reunited her with her daughters, perfecting her as well. And that's why, even though she was not killed, we still call her a martyr, because children are the physical prayer of a parent. Their blood was her blood. And so she is a martyr. And so that is the ultimate goal of parenthood, to see your children succeed and enter the kingdom of God.
Can I say just one small thing?
Absolutely, Thea.
Yes. And that's why on the next chapter, what it says on 196, it says that parents need to devote themselves to the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
Devotion. It means a lot of prayer.
Yep.
A lot of prayer, especially the society that we live these days. Our children, they need a lot of prayers.
Absolutely.
Every single day.
100%. All right, well, we are definitely going to go back into this, and we're for sure going to take the full class next class to go over this. I think that this is a very, very worthwhile discussion. I think that this is a discussion that, in theory, we could have taken the whole of this entire Blessed Darkness for Wounded by Love, could have all been dedicated to this one chapter, and we probably would still have subject matter to discuss. So I'm very, very happy that we're all eager to discuss it, and I look forward to our next class. I don't want to say next week because I can't remember what we've got going on next week. I think No, we don't, because we don't. It's the feast day of St. Andrew, so no, we do not. I was like, I'm pretty sure we don't have class next week. We got something going on. Oh yeah, the feast of St. Andrew. So I hope that you all will join us both physically and virtually for our Festival Vespers Monday night and for our liturgy on Tuesday morning. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. God bless you all. Have a very happy, happy Thanksgiving.
You all as well.
Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. We're ready, Pastor.